We are rapidly getting to the end of Acts. We have tonight, chapter 27, chapter 28. And as we've talked the last few weeks, these are not heavy theological chapters. Tonight's probably the last one that'll have any theology in it at all versus over the five or so we've been looking at and the two we have to go. I enjoy these chapters though because I like history, and so these chapters a little bit help support the fact that Luke knew what he was talking about, because the people he talks about, the things he talks about, have been proven by the experts to show that Luke's timetable, his understanding of Roman law, and all that other stuff is spot on.
He's on point, huh?
He's very on point, and so it helps support the rest of what he's talked about, because they've been able to prove these people really did exist and really were in place about the right time that Luke is writing. We touched on the last couple of weeks, John did 2 weeks ago, and I did last week, as we look at Felix and Festus, and they have found records showing these people existed, and they found the dates they transferred authority, which was the end of 59, early 60. So we can pretty well pinpoint what's the time frame Luke is talking about. As we look at him talking about these things, we can see other Roman rulers, especially Roman rulers, who were in place at the same time. So his timetable fits. We ended up, as you know, Paul sat in jail for 2 years. Felix leaves. He doesn't solve his problems. He leaves Paul sitting in jail. That's where he is now when Felix takes over. We looked last week at King Agrippa II and where he fits into the story. And so he fits in as well with all of these things that we're talking about. So tonight we're going to cover chapter 26, which is Paul's defense before King Agrippa. Felix is still there. Festus is still there. So he's still the Roman governor. He's on site with this defense, in essence, that Paul puts forward. But really he's talking to King Agrippa. He's the guy that's going to be taking Paul's interest, although Festus is still present. We ended last week looking at how the king and his sister, which is an interesting side story, which the historians like to talk about, have come into town. And we looked at also how King Agrippa was given authority to appoint chief priest. He's very well skilled on Jewish law, and so I think Festus probably thought he'd hit the jackpot with having King Agrippa come in, because Festus doesn't have a clue what's going on with all this Christianity versus Jewish stuff. He's new on scene. He doesn't understand Jewish law. He doesn't understand Jewish religion. And so he, I'm sure, smiled when Agrippa showed up, because he saw an opportunity to pass the buck. He also saw an opportunity. Remember, what's his primary concern? As we find the court proceeding unraveling, what's Festus's primary concern that he talked about the end of last week?
Wanted to please the Jews?
He wants to please the Jews. That's what all these guys want to do. But if he's going to send Paul to Rome, what does he
He
need?
has to have, like, why he's sending him. He has to have a list of his charges.
What are the charges?
Yeah.
And so here he is. He's got this guy in jail. He doesn't have a clue why he's there. Paul has appealed to Caesar, so he's got to send him there. Paul plays his trump card, which is, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't do this to me. Can't let the Jews manhandle me. And so he's appealed to Caesar. But Festus is sitting here thinking, what am I going to tell Caesar this guy's in jail for? Why am I sending him there when he doesn't understand the whole situation? And so he's looking forward, I am sure, to King Agrippa, helping him figure out, why is this guy here and what am I going to tell Caesar when I ship him off by boat? So that's where we're at as we open chapter 26. Let's pray and we'll jump into the chapter. God, thank you for the time we have together. Thank you for being with us tonight. I pray your Holy Spirit continues to help us as we study this book of Acts and see the beginning of the church, you see the spread of Christianity, and watch all these things unfold in a time frame, Father, that's so much different in one sense than what we live in here in the States today. So I pray that your Spirit guides us and helps us as we open up this chapter. Be with those who were traveling, many still are from our congregation. I pray your safety upon them and ask that you guide us tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. So the chapter opens up with King Agrippa telling Paul, tell me what you got to say. Notice this really is not a court trial. This is not a hearing in front of a court proceeding. It is simply an opportunity for Paul to be heard by the king, which makes this a little bit different than some of the other hearings Paul has been in. He's not on trial here. He doesn't have any charges levied against him. He's just showing up in front of King Agrippa to basically entertain these guys, which is sort of an interesting situation to me. But King Agrippa says, you've got a right to speak. What's Paul's primary first argument as he starts talking to the king? What does he
says
stress?
it's nice to be here. It's nice to talk to you. It's not buttering him up.
Doesn't he? You know, he
Consider
doesn't,
myself fortunate, he says.
which is sort of weird. We don't really know what's going through Paul's mind. We do know God has told him, you're going to Rome. So I think Paul is relaxed. Although he's been sitting in jail for 2 years doing nothing, he isn't afraid that these guys are going to execute him. He's not afraid that they're going to take him out of the picture because Jesus has told him, you are going to Rome. These people are not going to kill you. And so I get the feeling almost that he's just toying with these guys. And as Stephanie says, and Emily, he's glad to see you. He glad hands, as we say, strokes them a little bit. You're a smart dude. I'm glad I've got this opportunity to stand in front of you. It's almost like he's just playing a game. He's no longer being tried by these people. He sees an opportunity, I think, to entertain himself as well as entertain them. I don't know what he's hoping to achieve. He already knows he's going to Rome. He's already appealed to Caesar. There isn't anything King Agrippa can do for him. He's not going to release him. He can't execute him. It's like, okay, let's just have a conversation. And so that's the way he opens the category here is, you're a smart dude, glad to be here, you know everything you need to know, open the door. I think he sees King Agrippa as the guy who knows Jewish law. Remember, what kind of heritage does King Agrippa have? We talked about this last week, I think. Where's he from? He's not Jewish. So what is he? He's an Edomite. Okay, remember? Herod the Great, who's this guy's great-grandfather, was an Edomite. Really upset the Jews when Rome set him on the throne, in essence, over Jerusalem. He's the king of the Jews, but he's not Jewish. But his children and his son, great-grandson, and now his great-grandson of King Agrippa II, has in essence ruled this territory off and on, but they're not Jewish. So that's one of the reasons the Jews don't like him. One of the reasons the Jews don't like any of the Herods is they're setting an authority over them, but they're not Jewish. But they're given authority by Rome. They've got to sort of put up with Rome. Rome's the overarching umbrella of power. But most of these other countries are ruled by people who are from the nations. People in Greece have a Greek over them. People in all these other areas, Asia Minor, they've got people who reside there, people who are familiar with them and who are from, and for lack of a better word, the same bloodlines as the people on the throne, but not here in Jerusalem, not in Judea. They've got an Edomite who's sworn enemies of the Jews sitting on the throne. Now remember, we talked last week, King Agrippa is not king of Jerusalem. He's not king of Judea. He's northern area above the Sea of Galilee, but he does have, as we talked about last week, the authority to appoint high priest. Strange deal. Really, historians look at this and can't figure out how this ever happened. But Rome has given him authority to depose and set up the high priest in Jerusalem, although he's not king of Jerusalem. He's also got control of the temple and the temple treasury, which is another weird deal. So we've got a non-Jew guy telling the people who's going to be your high priest and controlling the temple mound. So they don't like him, but they curry his favor, same way they're doing Roman authorities, because they're trying to get Paul killed. Now the Jews don't know they can't kill Paul. They don't know what Jesus has told Paul. They have still been hoping for Festus to let him go. Remember, we talked about this last week. They wanted him to come down to Jerusalem so they could try him down there. Paul said, I ain't going. And so they came up to Caesarea, had their little hearing, didn't do them a bit of good. But they don't know that. They don't know they don't have any authority or power or clout. They're still muddling the waters up. King Agrippa, I don't know what he thinks. But he shows up. He's meeting Festus, who's the Roman governor, and he just sort of gets handed this quagmire of, hey, I've got this guy in jail. Maybe you'll listen to him because I don't know what to do with him. Help me out here. So these two guys have got together to try to come up and help Festus solve his problem of what am I going to do with this guy. So Paul, not only he begins, as y'all stated, patting him on the back, trying to help King Agrippa, feel good about I'm here. What's the next thing he covers? How does he describe who he is?
And he's Jewish.
Absolutely. He starts by saying, I'm one of the best Jews you've ever met. I am the top of the heap when it comes to Jews. I'm trained well. I'm educated well. Even the people know me. He says, I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus. Now, he's not from the area, but he's part of the Roman Empire. Brought up in this city, studied under Gamaliel. Who was Gamaliel? We talked about him. Who was he?
High-ranking Pharisee.
High-ranking Pharisee, a scholar of the day. He had his own school. Paul says, I was trained under this guy. It'd be like going to Harvard today. He's got a pedigree when it comes to education. Gamaliel was well-known, well-respected, a mucky-muck when it comes to Jewish teaching skills. And Paul says, this guy that trained me, I'm thoroughly trained in the law of my ancestors. I'm just as zealous for God as any of you here today. So he's laying it on thick. I am a Jew of Jews. I'm the guy who, if you want to find a faithful Jewish fellow, that's me. And he continues by saying, I fulfill my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. Does that strike you as a strange thing for Paul to say?
Well, to them it does.
Okay,
But
why?
for him, no.
Why not?
Because they don't believe in his God.
Okay, Agrippa certainly is not a Christian. Certainly doesn't believe in Jesus. The Jews that are against him certainly don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. But remember what Paul was doing when the church started? What was he doing when he first met Paul?
Persecuting the Christians.
Persecuting the church. And yet he stands up in front of Agrippa II and says, I fulfilled my duty to God with good conscience all my life. Doesn't that seem a little strange looking back at what he had been doing? How does he say that? Honestly, how does he say that?
God told him, well, he started believing in God. After once he talked to him, right?
Okay, he does, he has the conversion experience, we're gonna talk about that here in a second. He becomes a Christian, but before that, he's persecuting Christians.
He was following the law of Moses.
He's doing what he thought was right? Now, when he becomes a Christian, he changes gears and starts doing what God wanted him to do, like you said, Mike. But before that, even though he's persecuting the church, he believed he was doing what God wanted him to do. If there's a lesson from chapter 26 of Acts, it's that your conscience is not always a good guide. Paul says, everything I ever did, I did it in duty to God, and I have no qualms about what I've done. My conscience never hurt me. I never violated my conscience. Even while I was persecuting Christians, my conscience was clean because he thought he was doing what God wanted him to do. Now, he'll go on here in a minute and say, that all changed. Like Mike said, I had this experience and became a Christian, and then I started doing that. But he says, before that happened, everything I've ever done, my conscience has been clean. Even looking back at what he did, he can still say, my conscience was clean because I thought I was doing what's right. We need to be aware of that verse because we need to be real careful. Just because you think something is right doesn't mean it is. There's a lot of people who are doing horrible things, but their conscience is clear because they think it's the right thing to do. We look at some people like that and think, what's wrong with you people? But to them, it's the right thing to do. I read this verse and it scares me a little because there are a lot of sincere people who are sincerely wrong, but they believe they're absolutely correct. And they're very devoted to what they're doing. I've been in that spot where what I thought I was doing was right, and it turned out I shouldn't have been doing it. And I suspect if you look back through your life, we've all done things like that, where when we were doing something, we thought this is absolutely the right thing to do. But after you learned more, or you realize some other facts, you realize, oops, probably shouldn't have done that. But when you were doing it, you thought it was the right thing to do. And that's what Paul's saying here. And so especially in our religious realm, we need to always be aware, maybe I don't understand the Bible correctly. One of the things I do when I study with people, especially people I don't know well, is I always give them the benefit of the doubt that what they believe, what they're telling me they believe, they really do believe. And I've had some people come back at me and say, Bob, you don't believe that. You know, if you were being serious with us, you wouldn't be saying that. You can't believe that. That's what I believe. You know, that is what I believe. And I give people I study with the benefit of the doubt that what they tell me they believe, they really do believe. Now, I may not agree with them, but that's what they believe. And I try never to belittle somebody for what they believe, because that is simply what they believe. Anybody in here ever change their mind about something? You know? But before you changed your mind, you really believed what you thought you believed. Always when you're studying with the Bible with people, always approach them as though what they tell you they believe, how they understand the Bible, really is what they believe. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They're not lying to you. They're not being stupid. They're not trying to cause trouble. Until they prove otherwise, give them the benefit of the doubt that what they tell you they believe, how they understand the Bible, really is what they believe. And ask them to give you...
Not necessarily what you believe,
Well,
that's what they believe.
that's what they believe. And ask them to give you the same benefit of the doubt. I believe what you're telling me is what you believe, except that what I'm telling you is what I believe. One of us may be wrong. We may both be wrong, but we're both sincere. And I think this verse supports the ability to do that. Paul says, my conscience has been clean, everything I've ever done. Paul.
Well, they talked about the leaders, the Jewish leaders and so on, didn't believe the resurrection.
Correct.
So, and also, they didn't believe that Jesus was, the Son of God. But if you go back to Moses, gave a prophet out that, he was, the Messiah was going to be there. But they didn't believe that.
I know, it's all through what we've been studying.
You know?
Yeah.
Jews do think that
The Jews, I have no doubt, the Jews who were persecuting Paul firmly believed Jesus was not the Messiah that they were looking for. And I suspect most of them didn't believe he rose from the dead. And so that's why they're after Paul. They didn't believe Jesus rose from the dead and then decided that we don't want that. I really suspect most of them simply didn't believe Jesus was who he said he was. But they were very sincere about it. Just like Paul says, my conscience has always been clean. So he's laying the scene for King Agrippa so that when he has his conversion experience here in just a minute, he can say, everything I've ever done, I thought what I was doing was right. And that's the way we need to be. Whatever you believe is true, you need to act on that. Don't ever violate your conscience. Don't ever, I say that, that's what we do. I mean, we do that. We do things we shouldn't do at times. Some of us can violate our conscience and it doesn't bother us a bit. That's a bad place to be. It should always bother you to do something you know is not right. When you get to the point that you can do things that you know are wrong and it doesn't bother you, you got a serious problem. You've got no control. If you can intentionally violate your conscience and it not bother you, there's something wrong. It should bother you to do things you know are wrong. And we've all done that. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short of God's glory, and it should bother us when we do it. Period. Paul says, I never did that. Now, I don't think Paul was sinless, but his point is, in the context of what he's talking about, and the whole story here is, I want to show King Agrippa, Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Paul's preaching a gospel sermon, and he's telling King Agrippa, I always did what I thought was right. He wants King Agrippa to understand. What I'm telling you here, I was very sincere. And I'm going to get even more sincere here in just a minute as I tell you about this Jesus guy that I ran into. He's trying to get his attention. And so he says, I've never done anything wrong. Trying to, again, remember, Agrippa knows Jewish law, knows Jewish scripture. He's the local scholar when it comes to understanding Jewish stuff. So Paul's laying it on thick. And he tells him, I admit I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way. Notice he jumps right in at the very beginning. I'm still worshiping the God I've always worshipped. That's the key with Paul. That's why he can spend the rest of his life worshiping Jesus without beating himself up forever because of what he did before. I'm still worshiping the God of my ancestors. So he's laying it out for them as best he can, I think. This Jesus guy that I'm going to tell you about here in just a minute, it's the same God that I've always worshipped. The same God of the Jews who King Agrippa knows all about. I'm still worshiping him. But I'm a follower of the way. What's the way?
Christians were called the way because Jesus is the way.
Okay, so he's talking what? Christianity, right?
Yeah, Christian said.
Yeah. He's using the slang of the time. I'm a follower of the way. People, I think, understood exactly what that meant. I don't think King Agrippa had to sit there and think, what's the way? I think they had heard about Christianity. This is some 25, almost 30 years later from the crucifixion. The church is spreading everywhere. These rulers knew about Christianity. May not have believed it, may not have cared, but they knew about it. So when Paul says, I'm worshiping the God of our ancestors according to the way, King Agrippa, I have no doubt, knew exactly what he was talking about. He knew he was a Christ follower. And so he says, that's what I've been doing, which they call a sect. And John, I think, brought that up when he studied a couple of chapters ago. A sect is simply a group, a portion of something. And so the sect of the Jews, because remember, most people still thought Christianity was a Jewish religion. And so they're arguing here, Paul's saying, they just call it a sect. It's all part of the Jewish faith. But I'm telling you, that's not the way it is. That's what they call. Notice he says, which they call. Who's they? Okay, the Jewish people. They believed this Jesus follower group were still Jewish. Then it was simply a separate part of Judaism. Just like you got the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Zealots, other groups, and now you got this way people, these Jesus followers. Most people in this time span still believe Christianity was a Jewish faith. That is strange to us, is it not? Many people today would deny Jesus was ever Jewish, you know, because we don't have a good view of Judaism. I studied with people, and when you say Jesus was Jewish, he was not. Well, yeah, he was. I mean, that's what he was. People today don't realize that. They don't think about that because we are so anti-Jewish in a religious kind of way that we don't even want to acknowledge Jesus was Jewish. He did all the Jewish stuff. He kept the law of Moses. So for the longest time, that's one of the reasons the Jews are so against Paul. They saw this for what it was. If Christianity was correct, it's the end of Judaism. Because we're no longer following the law of Moses, we're doing this Jesus stuff. That's why the fight is as hard as it is. They can see our faith is over. We're letting Gentiles in. They don't have to get circumcised. They don't have to do all this other stuff we've had to do forever. What do you mean they don't have to sacrifice all these animals? The battle here is a religious one because the Jews didn't want to give up their Jewish faith. And so Paul is playing into that. These people call it simply a sect of the Jews. He says, I believe everything in accordance with the law and what's written in the prophets. He said, I'm not fighting against the law of Moses. I'm not denying the law of Moses. In fact, he'll go on to say, what I'm going to tell you is exactly what the law of Moses says. I'm simply laying it out for you. I mean, he just does a beautiful job here. He says, I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have. What does that mean to you when he says that? I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have. What's the hope they have?
Hope of the resurrection.
Yeah, the hope of the resurrection, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. And so I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. And that's what he's told Felix. And that's really what he's trying to tell Agrippa. That what I'm doing here, you already know all this stuff because you understand all this. And then he says, you're well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. He says to King Agrippa, you already know all this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You're well acquainted with all this stuff. That's why you're here. That's why I'm doing this for you. So, again, what is he trying to do with King Agrippa? What do you think he's trying to do here?
Trying to get him to believe in Jesus, isn't he?
I think exactly, Paul. He wants King Agrippa to come accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Paul never gives up trying to tell people about Jesus. And I look at this and think, what a feather in his cap. You know, if he could have got King Agrippa to become a follower of Jesus, Christianity in that area would have gone crazy.
Well, even in verse 28, Agrippa says to Paul, are you going to persuade me to become a Christian so easily?
Yeah,
So he knows it.
he's listening to this. He knows exactly what Paul's trying to do. Paul's buttering him up. He's going through all the scriptures. And I have no doubt we don't have the whole sermon here. Luke's given us a synopsis. But he's doing his best to get King Agrippa to understand who Jesus is. And of all the Roman rulers in place, this guy's got the best chance to get it. He understands the old law. He understands the law of Moses. He knows the prophets. He knows all this stuff. He's in that area. He knows the temple. He knows procedures. So Paul, I think, is hoping, I'm going to convince this guy that Jesus is the guy he says he is. Maybe he's practicing so when he gets to Rome, he's got a captive audience here. He knows he's going to Rome. Let's try it out here. Let's see if I can get King Agrippa to come around, because if I can do that, I'm ready to go to Rome.
I think he's just doing what he does best, and that's when he has a captive audience. He does his thing.
He does his thing no matter where. And we watch Paul do that, and Paul writes in some of his letters, Caesar's household, becomes Christians. His guards are Christian. Remember we talked a couple of weeks ago that they stopped letting the same guard have a time with Paul. When they rotated guards, they never got the same guy back again. And this is from secular writings, because Paul was converting so many of the Roman soldiers that they were running out of people to guard him. And so they had to stop letting these people get a second time with Paul. He was converting too many of them, Paul.
Well, the Sadducees were against all this because they would lose their jobs. If people changed and started believing in Jesus, they would lose their jobs. That's
Sure. It's certainly a power play here, isn't it? These guys who are the top of the heap when it comes to Judaism could see, if this way of Christianity takes over, we've lost all of our power. And of course, Jesus made that clear in the Gospels as he criticized the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the Jewish leaders, over and over and over, that your life's got to change. You've got to stop doing what you're doing. You've got to come around and do what you're supposed to do. And so absolutely, they didn't want to lose that power. And I'm sure that colored their mind some in not accepting Jesus for who he was. If I believe it, I'm done. I don't have any clout, which is a struggle for a lot of people. None of us like to give up power. Scott, you got something to say? All right. Notice he points out his way of life since childhood. He says, they've known me for a long time. Verse 5. These Jews who are after me, they know who I am. He's already said, I'm studied under Gamaliel. I know all this stuff. I've risen through the ranks. These people know me. And I think, again, he's trying to lay the groundwork for whatever charges they're bringing against me, they're lying. Because they know me. They know who I am. Why are they doing this? Why are you people doing this to me? You know me. You know I've always done what's right. And if I've always done what's right, what's the next argument he can make?
What have I done wrong?
Say it again.
What have I done wrong?
Not only what have I done wrong, what's the logical step? If what I do is always in accordance with God's will, what's the next argument he makes about Christianity?
He's
I'm
still,
saying, what's the charge then, why are you charging with?
Okay, but if that's true, what's he teaching about Jesus? Is it right or wrong?
It has to be right.
It's right.
It has to be right.
I've always done what's right. I've always obeyed the law. I have a clear conscience. So why don't you just believe me? In other words, nobody can prove me lying. These people know who I am. And then he goes on to give, his story of, I'm arresting people, I've gotten letters from people, I'm doing all this stuff. These people know who I am. They're well aware of my background, my history, my zeal. And so why do you think I changed from not believing in Jesus and persecuting him to now believing in Jesus and professing him as the Messiah? Why don't you accept that I'm just as sincere with that as I used to be, but something happened to change me? And he's going to go into that about what happened to me. And he points out that these people have known him forever. And so he says, in essence, I'm proclaiming Christianity not in spite of my Jewish background, but because I'm a Jew. Because I know all of this stuff. Because that's what the prophets have all prophesied about. The Messiah was coming. He's come. It's Jesus. I'm not trying to change Judaism. I'm showing this is the fulfillment of the law. And so, believe me, as I tell you people this stuff, they don't buy it, of course. And so we got a problem. Because Paul's trying to get this done here. And he said, I've got this hope going on before me here. Notice Paul makes the resurrection the center point. And when we did the apologetics study, the beginning of last year, whenever it was, the resurrection's the key to this thing. Either Jesus rose from the dead, or he didn't. If he didn't, this is a total waste of time. Christianity means absolutely nothing. If he did come back from the dead, we might should pay attention to what's going on around here. People don't do that. People don't come back to life after they've been in a tomb for 3 days. It just doesn't happen. And so if Jesus really came back from the dead, we better be listening to what he had to say. And that's why when you're talking to people, and again, we live in a nation at least, where historically Christianity has not been argued against. Even if you never went to church, nobody argued against Jesus. They all just sort of accepted what the Bible said, whether they wanted to believe it and live by it or not, but they never really made an argument. Now we're living in such a hodgepodge of people. You run into people a lot now who don't believe Jesus ever rose from the dead. Some of them don't even know who Jesus is. And so you've got to be able to prove and argue he rose from the dead. And when we do the apologetic stuff, that lesson on can you justify our belief that Jesus is alive has to be the key point of how you convince people to accept Christianity. Because if you can't get past that, there's nothing to believe. There's no reason to be a Christian if Jesus isn't alive today. And so you've got to be able to argue he did resurrect from the grave. And so Paul focuses on that all the time. And that's what he's doing. Remember that was his argument when he was first grabbed in Jerusalem and he could see he wasn't going to get anywhere. He throws out there, and by the way, Jesus rose from the dead. And the Sadducees and Pharisees start fighting with each other, and Paul plays the crowd. He's doing the same thing here, but he's not trying to play King Agrippa. He's trying to convince him Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That's the hope I've got. That's the hope that God's always told was going to happen. This faith, and notice he says in verse 8, King Agrippa, it's because of this hope that the Jews are accusing me. In other words, I believe in a resurrection. And because of that, they're after me. I believe Jesus is alive. And because of that, they're after me. What's our hope? What do you hope for when it comes to Christianity?
That Jesus comes back sooner than later.
Jesus is coming back sooner than later. That's what we wish. But what do you want?
He takes us home with him.
That's the key. Not that Jesus is coming back, but he's coming back to take us home. My hope is that when Christ comes back, I join him. That's the hope we've got to have. A lot of people may believe Jesus is coming back, but they don't have any hope they're going to join him. They're living outside his protection, so to speak. The hope that Paul's talking about is the hope we as Christians have, that I'm going to live with God forever. That I'm going to spend eternity with him. And that I am a child of God, and Christ is my Messiah, he's my Savior. And when he comes back, I'm joining him. That's the hope of our salvation. That Jesus Christ is coming back for me. That should be what makes your day survivable no matter what happens. Paul.
You talk about the hope, but we also, I think he would be thinking that he could reach other people and they would have the same hope I have.
Absolutely. That's what Paul does in his whole life. I'm going to try to tell other people about Jesus so they can have the same hope I've got. That's why we should want to tell other people about Jesus, is so they can have the same hope you and I have, that when Christ comes back, they will spend eternity with him as well.
See, I see that as faith.
It's the same as faith.
See, I don't hope, I know.
Yeah.
You know, there's a difference, I think.
There's a big difference.
Yes.
And when we talk about biblical hope, it's not, I hope I win the lottery.
Yeah.
That's not hope as far as the Bible's concerned. The hope Paul talks about is not some pie in the sky, I hope this is going to happen. It's an assurance that this is going to happen. I don't have any doubt this is going to happen. Always understand that, especially in Paul's writings. When he talks about hope, and he talks about hope a lot, he covers it a lot. In all of his arguments, he's got this hope. It isn't some, well, I hope this is going to happen. It's an absolute assurance that when Christ comes back, I'm going to live with him forever.
Well, it's a guarantee.
It's a guarantee. It's an assurance. It's not questionable as far as Paul's concerned.
You already got your ticket.
He's already got it punched, and he's sitting in the conductor's seat. He's on his way. And that's how assured you and I should be. John writes in 1 John, we can know we have eternal life. To me, one of the saddest things you can have is be a Christian and not be assured of your salvation. Well, I hope I am.
That's what I've heard many Christians say that.
Yes, I hope I am. But their hope is, there's some doubt to it. Well, I hope I am. They're not saying it like, I'm sure I'm saved. They're hoping they are. We need to be assured of our salvation. There shouldn't be a doubt in our mind. I'm going to heaven. I'm saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And I know it. And John says we can know it. So when you're assured of what Christ has done for you, you can not get the job and still smile.
Yeah.
You can have health issues and still smile. You can have the worst day of your life and still have something positive in your heart because you know this world is not my own. I'm just a passing through. I'm going to spend eternity with God. That's true hope. And if you haven't got that, you lose the joy of your salvation. Because if I can't be assured that I'm saved, how can I ever face this world? How can I ever get through all this junk?
Then you don't have salvation. You know, if you don't.
I won't say you don't have it, because I think a lot of people, just like Emily said, Stephanie, they've been taught that you just can't be sure. They've been taught that, well, you can't hang on to it that tightly. There's always this chance you're not saved. And sadly, again, the group I grew up in, that was their mindset. I've shared enough with people who would say, you know, if you commit a sin and don't apologize or repent for it and then die, you're not saved because you have an unrepentant sin on you. What's the fun of that? You know, your whole salvation rests upon dying at the right moment. There's no joy there. There's no assurance or faith there. And so you get the mindset of, well, I'm probably not going to make it anyway, so what the heck am I going to try? I can't do this. I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to lose my salvation. I might as well just do what I want to do and not worry about it. And that's the logical progression if your mind is, I'm really not sure if I'm saved or not. And if you get anything out of Acts chapter 26, besides don't let your conscience control you, let the Word of God and His Holy Spirit lead you, it means to be you have a hope that's unquestionable. You have an assurance of your salvation, and it will see you through anything in your life because you know where you're going. And if you're struggling with that, and I'm reading this, if you're struggling with that, come talk to me. You need to have an assurance that you're saved. And I want you to have that assurance. Because it can't be any fun worrying about, am I saved or not? Am I going to die at the wrong moment or not? Can I really be sure or not? Paul had no doubt. Here's a guy that was persecuting Christians He'll say here in a minute, I'm casting the lot with all these people, and they're dying because of me. But he could say in front of this guy and in all of his letters, I have no doubt I'm going to heaven. No question in my mind I'm saved. I suspect most of us have not done the horrible things Paul did against Christ and his people. But he was assured of his salvation. Don't question it. Get assured of it. And if you're struggling with that, again, come talk to me if you want to. Ask God to give you that assurance. Pray about it. Ask Him to give you a sense of security that you know your salvation is real. And Paul says, I have no doubt. I believe it. I've got this hope. And again, it's not a pie in the sky hope. It's an assurance hope. It's a knowledge that I've got this. I hope the sun comes up tomorrow. Well, duh. Obviously it's going to. That's the kind of hope Paul's talking about. I know I've got this hope that says it's real. Notice he says, on authority of the chief priest, I put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Now, we don't hear much in the book of Acts about Christians dying. James has died. Stephen has died. That's about it. But Paul says, I'm casting my vote with all these people when they're put to death. There must have been a bunch of Christian people dying that Luke doesn't bother to tell us about, for one reason or another. We don't hear that about Paul. We don't see that in Luke's story. But Paul says it right here. I'm voting to execute people. That to me says Paul was a pretty big mucky muck. He's already said, I'm educated under Gamaliel. I'm rising through the ranks. I seriously doubt if he had got the right to vote if he wasn't somebody important in the Jewish faith. Paul doesn't stress that very often. Doesn't build himself up very often. But here's an insight into the power he had before Christ got a hold of him. I'm voting to execute people. Not a good spot to be in. But he knows it. He knows that's what I used to do. He's telling all this to Agrippa. We're not going to finish tonight, John. He's telling all this to Agrippa to get Agrippa to understand all this stuff I'm telling you. I'm as faithful a Jew as you could ever find. Believe me when I tell you, I'm doing all this stuff right. I know the scriptures. I'm going after this stuff. So I'm sincere, King. So when I tell you this next part, you need to listen to me. He says, Dear, I'm on this Christian hunting journey, and I'm on my way to Damascus, and this critical thing happens to me, and he'll say, I see Jesus face to face. And it's a challenge. He's laid all this groundwork, not of I'm this faithful Christian guy. I'm a faithful Jewish guy. I'm gung-ho for God. And I'm on my way to persecute more people. And let me tell you what happens. And that flips his whole life. Most of us, I suspect, don't have a Damascus Road experience, where you're headed 180 degrees away from God, and the bright light turns on, and something happens in your life, and you think, what on earth am I doing? And you switch 180 degrees and head back to Jesus. I suspect if we had more Damascus Road experiences, we'd have more faithful Christians. Most of us don't get that. And I've had people, and maybe you've thought this yourself, if God would just appear to me like that, I'd believe him forever. My faith would be so strong, I'd be after him hook, line, and sinker, as we say. And we use that as an excuse not to be the people we're supposed to be. But if we believe the Bible, we know it happened to Saul, who becomes Paul. We see the events that occur in the Bible. John says in his gospel, these things are written that you might believe. And so if we believe what the Bible says, I don't need a Damascus Road experience. to have a faith that gives me hope in Jesus Christ.
Well, he also writes, the ones that believe by the writings are more blessed than the ones that had the interaction, that, you know, the 12 or whoever's with him.
Isn't that nice to know? Jesus says you and I are blessed more than those apostles were who saw him walking on the earth. Why? Because we believe and we haven't seen it. Our faith, in a sense, has to be stronger than Peter, James, and John's faith, because they lived through all this stuff. They saw the miracles. They watched Jesus die. They watched him walking on the earth after he came back out of the grave. They didn't have faith the way you and I have faith. They had sight. And that's what Paul's saying here. Everything I did based on the scripture until this event happens, and then boom, I changed 180 degrees because I had this experience. I'm still doing what the Bible says. I was just mistaken about what the Bible was saying. And as soon as this happened to me, I totally changed. I'm still just as zealous. I'm still just as committed. Notice what Paul's doing. I've always been gung-ho. I'm just as gung-ho now as I used to be. It's just I found the truth. I'm just the other direction. Because Jesus appeared to me. If we believe the Bible, we have the same faith Paul had, the same hope Paul had, because we believe what Scripture says. And so Paul's about ready to do this. He's telling Agrippa, he's laid the groundwork for him. I'm this on-fire Jew guy. And let me tell you what happened while I was going down to arrest these people. And that's the next half. We'll pick that up next week, Lord willing. Keep looking at this sermon. I mean, this is a beautiful sermon to try to convince someone who Jesus is. And again, Paul is using his history, his background, his experiences to show, why do I believe what I believe? We need to be able to do that, even without a Damascus Road experience. We need to be able to say, here's why I believe in Jesus Christ, and lay it out to people.
Do you think he was picked because he was so zealous in the way he approached it on the other end?
I have to believe that God singled Paul out for a reason.
Yeah.
Number one, he was a mucky-muck guy. He had a lot of influence, a lot of power. Number two, he's very zealous.
He's very focused.
Yeah, God knew if I can get him on my side, we're going like gangbusters, because that's what he's doing already. I think that's exactly what happened. God picked him out for a reason.
He was good at what he did to begin with, he just wasn't doing it in the right direction.
That's correct. And I think when I say that, God's got a goal for every one of us.
I think he picked them based on the persecution that he was laying out as well, because people had to think, good grief, if this guy can come to God, anybody can.
And isn't that exactly what he said right here to King Agrippa? Look at all this stuff I was. Look at what I was doing. And then, boom, Jesus shows up. You need to believe what I'm telling you now is just as truthful as what I was telling you then. Absolutely right. If this guy can come to Jesus, something miraculous must have happened to get him coming this direction. Absolutely right. And so you tie those two together. He's somebody the Jews are going to listen to. But the Jews didn't listen to it. They didn't listen to it. And so all that work, he didn't get most of it to buy into it. So he goes to the Gentiles. And that's a message for all of us. You may be talking to 1 million people about Jesus and nobody listens to you. Don't ever give up. Don't ever quit and think, well, I'm wasting my breath. Paul fought this his whole life, but he never gave up. Noah fought it for a long, long time. Nobody listened to him, but he built that ark anyway. Don't ever give up just because other people don't listen. You keep doing what you know to be right. Paul.
What happened to Paul when the Christian people were being rejected and so on? You go back to 1950, if you were a priest and went into South America, the idle people down there killed the priests.
Sure.
And if you go to China right now, they say if you're caught with a Bible in China, you're going to be killed.
Yeah, we live in a persecuted world today as well. You get a magazine called Voice of the Martyrs, and it talks about Christians today who are just being killed right and left. Last century, I don't know about this century, but the 1900th century, more Christians died for their faith, apparently, than had died for the whole 1900 years before. Because this world is so adamant that they don't want Christianity to survive. Because people want no rules. And that's the world we're looking at now. It's all about me. I'll decide what gender I want to be. I'll decide what I want, how I want to live. I'll decide what I want to take from you. I'll decide what's mine is mine and what yours is mine. And nobody can tell me no. Christianity says, there's rules God's laid in place. And we live in a world where Satan is saying, get rid of all the rules. Be who you want to be. Don't let any stupid religious people tell you no. Just do what you want to do. And it's no wonder we see persecution the way it is in the world today. They want to take our morality away from us. There's no right and wrong anymore. Mike?
Do you think Jesus was testing him when he let him get beat all the time, you know, wherever he went, rocked and beaten? Do you think he was testing him to see how much faith he had?
I think he allowed those things to happen because he wanted Paul's faith to be strong. Absolutely. And of course, Jesus appears to Paul a time or two to give him that strength. Remember, a couple
Because
of
he went
times.
through it. I mean,
I don't know that I could do it. I hope I never have to be in that spot where somebody says, reject Jesus, or we're going to start with this thumb, and we're going to take a knife, and we're going to chop that thumb off, and then we'll take the next finger, and the next finger, and until you say something,
Paul
we'll
was doing
keep
this
cutting
putting up
appendages
Paul.
off. I don't want to have to live it. I don't want to have to take that chance. But Paul did that. They did that to him. And I think, again, that's another reason people listened to what he had to say. Because they could see, he says in one of his letters, I bear the scars of living for Jesus. I have no doubt. Can you imagine being stoned to death, not having bruises and scars, and being whipped the way he was? He had to be an ugly-looking guy.
And you'd stop and go, I don't need this anymore.
That's right, but he never does. And that's why his message is so strong. He put up with all of that and never quit. And so you go back to, he's zealous. You go back to look at all the persecution he was doing. Now he's teaching Jesus. And once he starts teaching Jesus, he sees all this, people see all this persecution he puts up with, and they're thinking, why would anybody do that? Because it's true. Absolutely. Paul.
Well, you also, I won't mention the person's name, but we got a person that's got 10,000 people in their church, and you don't have to ask for forgiveness.
Sure.
God loves you, so you're going to go to heaven.
Well, Satan will switch the gospel just a little bit. It's not going to do well to get into a Christian church and say, let's just violate everything God says. Instead, it's going just the opposite direction. Get into a Christian church and say, well, God is so full of love, he won't send anybody to hell. How could a God who loves everybody send you to hell? Just do what you want because God loves you. That's Satan's smartness. If he can just shave a little bit of truth off, people will buy into it. It's not going to work if you say, let's just start worshiping Satan. Most people who have any sense of Christianity are not going to say yes to that. But if they will say, well, God loves everybody, so do what you want because everybody's going to heaven. Yeah, that's a whole lot more believable, and people want to believe that because they don't want any rules anyway. So God's going to love me no matter what I do. Yay! Yeah, that's exactly what Satan's doing.
Well, he also uses the side of doubt.
That's it. Yeah.
And he started out in the garden. Did God really say that?
Yeah.
And
God wasn't serious when he said you have to do all this stuff. and we know he was, but Satan's out there and he's pretty glib. And he's got some pretty good speakers on his side who can convince people of almost
It
anything.
amazes me because if you read the Old Testament, he kind of does what he says.
He's got a
You know?
judgment
You
coming.
know?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the trouble with the world today is God's judgment isn't as sure as it was. But even as I say that, you watch the Jews, he would destroy them. They would come back to him, and within a generation, they're right back where they were. You think, don't you learn anything? And they don't. So even if we say, if God would just zap a few people today, more people would believe. They didn't do that in the Old Testament. But there's coming a time when that final judgment's going to be here. And we need to be right with God when that happens. Because there isn't any chance to get anything afterwards. All right, we'll try to finish this next week. Since we have a fifth Sunday, we have potluck this Sunday, so we will not have potluck next Wednesday. So we'll just have class.
So we're not having.
There is no potluck
Next week.
first Wednesday if there's a fifth Sunday meal, which we have a fifth Sunday meal this Sunday. So next Wednesday, we'll still meet, even though it's the first Wednesday, we'll try to finish chapter 26. John, you were right. Didn't get done.
If y'all know Dina,
Huh?
I met with her earlier with Carla. We're going to baptize her next Wednesday.
Oh,
So if you guys want to show up at 5:30, we're going to do that real quick. So feel free to show up for that if you like.
Yeah, come over if you can. I think it'd be neat if we could all just be here to watch her get baptized. Let's close. God, thank you for the class we've had tonight. Thank you for this message from Paul as he defends himself and talks about his life and Christianity and the truth of the gospel. And Father, I pray that we will be encouraged as we see Paul and the life he lived through and the things he endured, that his faith didn't waver. He stayed true to you, put up with all of this stuff because he knew the assurance of your faithfulness. God, help us to be just as assured of your faithfulness as Paul was. Help us not to doubt. Help us to have a hope that doesn't waver. The assurance, God, that we are saved by the blood of Jesus. Thank you for giving us that opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, everybody.
I'm glad you're saying this. I forgot what I said.